Well, here we go. I'm providing these pre-recorded and then I'll run them through live as well by playing the recording, obviously. Welcome to week number 7. I hope you had a good rest week. We all know you were doing a lot of work and catching up coursework during the rest week. I was doing a lot of marking as well, to be honest. So today we're going to have a look at the desktop, or what's also called a fingerprint audit, which is not the full audit we talked about in week 5, just before the break week. That was the full on. This is now probably more what you might do in-house yourselves. You may not get consultants in so much to do this, depending on your portfolio. These are basically cut down in the level of detail, so they're quicker and they're cheaper to undertake and complete, but they're not as detailed, so you are relying on existing information quite a lot, and you're extrapolating from the minor inspections and interviews that you will do. So you're trying to predict into the future what you're beginning to find, patterns and trends. Now the drawback is really hello. Things keep popping up on my screen when I'm recording. So the drawback in terms of the reliability of the programs and plans and benchmarking that you'll undertake from the outputs of the audit is that they rely on past audits and existing and past records and limited interviews. So they are relying on historical data. So this is where you're really beginning to try and spot those patterns and profiles that are developing. So you're using those and you're projecting those over the next couple of years. It is not based on an interrogation of 100% of the actual assets that are out there. You're not going to go and visually inspect 100% of the assets. You may go and look at one or two, especially if the records are telling you that particular pieces of equipment or machinery or production lines or whatever it is are showing a pattern of increased failure or increased maintenance requirements in comparison to their fellow assets. You may need to go and look at that particular one, but you're not going to look at everything as you would in the full-blown asset. So we take a sample approach, and we may look at about 10% of the assets as a random inspection. So there is still physical inspection involved in a fingerprint or a desktop audit, but it's very limited. As an example, when I've been running and undertaking condition audits of social housing portfolios, I won't give names of any, but one portfolio had over 3,000 residential units, houses, apartments, etc. There's no way we were ever going to be able to inspect all 3,000 of them in an economic fashion the client could even consider affording. And the time to do that would have been spread over probably more than 12 months to get an accurate picture of it. So a randomized selection of the units of 10% was selected by the client. With hindsight and experience from that process, I think the selection of the random properties should not be left to the client. They may have sent us to their worst properties, and then we extrapolate what we found across the whole portfolio, which would artificially inflate the financial requirements. Or on the other hand, they may do the opposite, only send us to the good ones, makes them look fantastic, but it does reduce their funding. So you've got to be careful. I really don't think clients should select the random assets you will have a look at. Now, from a desktop and a fingerprint audit, it's the same as a full audit, although a full audit's much more robust and reliable, but you're still aiming to get a 5 to 10 year maintenance program out of this. and you are looking to identify and quantify all the backlog works and any code or legislation problems. Now, obviously, code legislation problems and backlog works, they're difficult to do if you don't inspect everything. So you might rely a bit more on interviews here. The data can also support the continual evolution of the whole of life model for the strategic planning of the organization. But you are trying to get that 5 to 10 year. Remember, 5 years you can be quite accurate with your prices and timing, but as you get further out to 10 years, your reliability and accuracy financially does tend to fall away. The desktop, I call it a desktop audit. A desktop audit, it will map and model all the existing practices and identify opportunities for improvement. Now, with the full audit, you're interviewing absolutely everybody, you're looking at absolutely everything. This one, you're being more restrictive on your interviews and you're only looking at maybe 10% of the assets, if that. So again, you will identify these things, but probably not in the level of detail and robustness that the full audit does. But remember, it's quicker and it's cheaper. And the aims, they apply equally to a building or a production facility or a power station or a mine site. They're the same. They still apply. No matter where you work, the same basic aims are there. So preparation. We need to prepare for the desktop or fingerprint audit. So before you start meeting anybody, before you start arranging interviews with any of the stakeholders, you, as the internal auditors, you'll actually have a meeting amongst yourselves, so you can technical term to be and have a workshop, but I have heard it referred to as to nut out. Must be an Australian term, I think. Nut out the understanding of what the objectives are and the purposes and the processes and who the key personnel and steps are. So you've got to get your head around what you're about to look at before you start looking at it. You've got to get a firm understanding of all these things. And the following steps, I'm going to give you a few steps here. I'm going to say should be performed in the planning process. You say planning meeting, I prefer to do a workshop as a two-way event, but a planning meeting with business stakeholders. You must absolutely categorically and clearly outline key process steps. Okay, so they're going to be recorded in minutes of the meeting. They're going to be converted to flow charts. They're going to be recorded as both. They're probably going to go into a project management plan. So you've got milestones, etc. popped in there, and you're going to highlight the information in and out flows. So where it comes from, where it goes to, who's responsible for providing it, returning it. You keep a record of it as well. So you record when it comes in, you know, what day, time, and from who, and exactly what it is, and exactly when it went back. And you need to set up internal control components. Well, I've just been touching on those, recording everything and managing it and controlling it. You need to validate the draft reporting. It's called, what's got narratives and flowcharts, and subject matter experts are going to look at them. You come up with what you think is going on, then you're going to workshop them and get them validated off, get the tick of approval from the subject matter experts if they exist. They're the people who run certain departments or are responsible for certain assets. So you need to identify who they are. That they're identified at the very beginning. And then you want a pre-planning questionnaire that's going to facilitate the meeting that you're having at the beginning here. So you need a questionnaire that goes out to the key customers, the key stakeholders, etc., so they can give feedback, and that's going to form, you know, the bones of your initial meeting. Records, very important, and we have mentioned in the past that you probably won't get access to all of the records. Most critically, you review this information. So this isn't really open for much alteration. If there's something on this list and you can't get it, you note and record that you couldn't get it. You don't just ignore it. You're opening yourself out to a lot of problems then, because they go, we didn't look at so and so. And you can go, oh yeah, but you didn't provide it. Well, I don't know about that. No. So you must record things that don't happen, record negatives. So you need to look at your maintenance expenditures. This may be in the computerized maintenance management system. It might be in a filing cabinet. But you're looking at the patterns. You're trying to identify problem areas of equipment, of process, or whatever. You're trying to identify things that stand out like a sore thumb almost. And you can see that by peaks of expenditure, etc. And this is where some of your benchmarking will support what you find, because you'll have an idea what competitors or other internal departments are running at a certain cost per full-time employee, or cost per an hour maintenance run, or whatever. It should stand out quite easily. You're looking at the records. You want to know the asset profiles. Are they new? Are they old? Are they up to date? Are they modern? How much has been spent? Have they ever had a massive overhaul? Have they been taken offline? So you need asset profiles, their ages, how much they're utilised. Sorry, I've still got Zs in here. How critical are they? Remember, if they're not critical, you may not actually, they certainly wouldn't be the 10% you looked at. So if it's not critical, you wouldn't bother with it. What's their capacity? Are they running at full capacity, or have they got some expansion? And you can go on with more questions like that. Have there been any changes in use of equipment, or locations, or areas, or the layout may have been redone? I mean, if you've gone from mostly a manual production line to an automated production line, especially the more modern AI type ones that are coming in, your layout's going to change a lot. And there'll be areas where people cannot go unless they're a certified technician for the equipment itself. What's the demands on the equipment? I mean, is it increasing or is it decreasing? You've got external providers we talked about, and we talk about a bit later on in the unit as well. These are your service providers, your equipment providers. I mean, they may not be hard asset related, they could be soft asset related. You might have your HR outsourced or something, but you need to see their records and talk to them. You want to see the minutes of all the meetings that are being held. As we said a week or so ago, you need, I think it was just before the break when we were talking to benchmarking KPIs, saying that you have to have regular meetings. You've got to regularly record this stuff. You need to see the minutes of all those meetings for the maintenance, for the capital expenditure, the operational expenditure, everything. You want to see the meetings because that shows you how things are moving and evolving, and they may not have actually had an effect or been implemented yet. And don't forget to look at your safety records and your human relations records. The reason I put HR sickness records in is because when I was responsible for the Queensland court system, we had a problem with, I can only call it sick building syndrome in some of the sites, some of the bigger ones actually, but it wasn't the whole building. When we actually started to analyse, people were complaining, so we looked, or I looked, at the sickness records and identified them on the plans to see if there were clusters, and there were clusters. There were clusters of people being off more than anyone else. Now this was stripped of any, I got HR to strip identification of who the people were, what they did or anything. You could draw some conclusions where the clusters were because that was a certain business unit maybe, but that allowed us to track down which air conditioning ductwork and which chiller set and which compressors, etc., were causing the hotspots, and they were replaced and the hotspots disappeared. So you can do that. That's only an example. It would be different for whatever industry you're actually in. And overview the building management system and the computerized maintenance management system histories. The BMS, with me being more building related, that's what's running the lighting, the security, the air conditioning, etc. You can see how often it's been fiddled with and tweaked. Why are certain areas always requesting to increase or decrease the temperature of their aircon, or why the light's always on in one area, and you can learn a lot from that. All the policies that your organisation has got, the procedure documents, organisational charts you would have looked at earlier when you were looking at the communication flows and who's responsible for certain things. Any key reports, I mean, obviously executive downwards have standard reports that are provided on a regular basis. Could be weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever. You want to see them all. See if they're effective. If they report something, can you follow that trail to see what happened, if anything happened? Are they efficient? Some things are being reported far too often, tying people's time up. And does the process actually succeed? Is it a successful thing to do? Is it beneficial? You need you need to key into all the applications used in the process. Really, for computerized, you'll have someone who needs to give you access to all of this, because you won't have those levels of access probably. And you need the descriptions and the listings of the master data for the processes being audited. So you've got to have and there are industry standard descriptions and codings for this. They vary between industry. If you come across the descriptions and the codings and that for certain operations and processes, don't change them, stick with them, okay? And include all the data fields and the attributes that go into these forms and systems. An ISO 9001 audit. So we've got the international standard here for auditing, and it's used basically for a gap analysis to find out where you're falling down on the job a little bit, or where your competitors are beating you a lot. That's a gap, and you're looking for gaps there. So you're analysing these gaps for improvement opportunities, and we spoke about this just before the break week, doing benchmarking. So you conduct a gap analysis to find out where your company is already meeting the 9001 requirements. Please go and look it up in the library if you haven't seen this, and where the emphasis for any improvement should be focused. Where should you invest your time and money? You know, you're not doing a scattergun approach, you're doing keyhole surgery almost to this degree. An example checklist could have 7 categories like these. The context of the organisation: public, private, is it producing commercial things? Is it mostly business to business? Is it a mine? Is it a power station? What is it? What's the context of that organisation and its environment that it works in? What type of leadership has it got? What planning do they undertake? How do they follow that planning? What's the reality check on that and the reliability of it? What support do they provide? Operationally, what do they do? How do they do it? Then you evaluate their performance, and that could be most of those things above we just looked at there. You evaluate those. Evaluation could be just internal, but you could be beginning to drag in benchmarking yet again to this to make sense of the evaluation. And then you found the gaps that can be improved, so then you recommend the improvements. Interviews. We had a lot about these about the first week or so when we were talking about different human traits and personality and management styles, which can complicate getting reliable information out. Senior management, you've got to identify any known issues, any plans they've already got in place, any strategic goals that are going to start introducing change management. You need to know about it. You need to talk to maintenance managers, facility managers, asset managers, production managers. It could be the vehicle manager, the fleet manager, whatever, safety manager, I could go on, but they all need to be interviewed. The actual staff on the ground doing the work, the maintenance staff, whether they're internal or external, you need to have a chat with them. A formal interview will do with the people higher above. You can be a little less formal as you come lower down, and don't forget, as I said, you learn an awful lot from people like the cleaners, and then just general staff. In my world, for facilities buildings, we like to see post-occupancy surveys. So people move in, and after they've been in a building for a while, could be in a factory for a while, you can do a survey on them. So you've been in for a few months now, give us your feedback on these questions. I'll tell you one that will probably always crop up if you've got female staff. There won't be enough female toilet facilities. There never is. The National Construction Code, which does have certain minimum requirements, etc. in it, obviously not written by ladies. Some common issues that you might start banging your heads against here. You might find lots of failures to meet just the very basic Australian standards or codes for maintenance. Generators and that, I've mentioned the examples where I found backup generators were only ever tested once a year, and that was on a Sunday when there was no one in the facility, no one drawing power apart from the very basic equipment going. And when you go and do a real-time test, which is what you're meant to do under full load with everybody's computers turned on, everything on, they fail quite often. Now, depends what your operation is and that. I mean, you might be happy to give up a couple of hours of tin can production, but if you're doing an operation, you can't give up a couple of seconds without the power kicking in. So it's the criticality comes in again. Your exposure to risk for not doing your normal maintenance will increase. You'll find that especially in economically difficult times. Maintenance that's not seen to be absolutely essential tends to be deferred, put on the back for a while to save money when they're not making a lot of profit or whatever, or their funding's down. That snowballs over a couple of years. You might find there's difficulty complying with the legal requirements for disability access and use of your facilities. There are a lot of exclusions for certain types of facility and work, but if you've got if you've got any office workers or the public come into your areas or something, yeah, it's not just people in wheelchairs, by the way. It's deaf people, blind people, well, not deaf, hearing and vision impaired, and also allows for certain mental issues and that. So it's not just people in wheelchairs. Common issues again, you'll find safety. You'll find stuff stored poorly, rubbish piling up, cleaning not up to standard, signage may be out of date or broken, and I can go on with this. Again, that's a difficult one to do. I would often find furniture and boxes and that stored on the ground floor level, tucked underneath the fire escape staircase. Now, could be a fire risk. It might be blocking the escape door. So there's all that sort of stuff. People may not know what they're responsible for. I fell into this at the uni a little while ago, not realising how to do a certain thing as a unit coordinator. So you've got to find out if everybody's clear about what they need to do. Indoor environmental quality. I mean, I call that sick building syndrome, but in some of your more process orientated areas, it will be dust, noxious fumes, sound levels. So you end up having to wear ear defenders and breathing apparatus and filters and so there's a lot more to it. Lighting levels as well, they can be a problem sometimes, especially. I'll give you an example again. I once moved a telephone centre. I can't say who it was, but it was a government telephone centre, and we moved them from one building to a new building, and it was great. So all the computers, all the telephones went in, and surprise, surprise, it all worked on day one, which it had never done before, but I'd made sure it did. But we had a lot of people complaining that they were getting headaches because the building floor that wasn't part of my remit, I had asked the questions, by the way, had the wrong type of lighting that wasn't compatible with all the computer screens, and you were getting lots of glare and flicker, and it was giving people headaches. So that's one way of doing it. And of course, if you don't have the right level of lighting as well, people are going to start fumbling, making mistakes, hurting themselves. Car parking, end of journey facilities. Big problem quite often car parking is. End of journeys where you're more in a CBD or something, and companies are trying to get good Green Star or neighbours ratings for their buildings, so they expect people are going to run, jog, cycle, walk to work. Now, of course, they're all going to be sweaty and dirty, so they need somewhere to store their bikes or whatever, and then somewhere to have a shower and get changed. That's basically end of journey facilities. In some industrial processes, you may have that anyway for people to clean up and that before they leave, like coal miners. And security, that could be an issue. Won't go into detail. Security. This one's coming in more. You can't avoid this anymore. Sustainability. We have to consider sustainability all the time now. It's not an add-on anymore. So we're always looking at what the carbon footprint is. That was the old way of looking at it, and people still use that terminology, so I'll use it now. But we're looking at being more water efficient, using less water, recycling water, energy efficiency, trying to use more energy efficient equipment or white goods, producing our own electricity, solar panels, wind turbines, etc. We're all having to comment on these in audits. Oh, have we got automatic lighting? Is it LED lighting? Loads of things like this. I mean, one of my little bugbears always used to be finding the ream or the zip hot water boiler, so you could go up and make your cup of tea or coffee. Yeah, they keep a quantity of water at the right boiling temperature 24/7, so they're using power all the time to keep that water just right. So I don't know whether you want a more instantaneous version than that. So our fingerprint, our desktop audit reviews all utility consumptions, and we try to break it down into different areas, and we try to find out the environmental ratings of all the equipment we use in the buildings. Okay, you tend to find the cheaper a piece of equipment is, the less efficient environmentally it is. To draw conclusions, you come back to that benchmarking. You need to benchmark it so you can find out where your gaps are, your gap analysis, where your improvement opportunities are, and that could be a rolling program. Shortcomings of desktop or fingerprint audits, as I said at the beginning, you look at historical, possibly out of date records. You only look at maybe 10% if you're lucky of assets, and they'll only be the critical ones then. And then you extrapolate from that. You project into the next 5 years plus. Limited inspection, extrapolation, supported by records. It's not that accurate. It's not as inaccurate as you think it could be, but it's not. But even a full audit, where you look at absolutely everything, general, professionally considered to be maybe 10 to 15% accuracy in prices, and you tend to find that most of those are pessimistic. So they value maintenance works at a higher rate than it actually is. But your accuracy's on the line here. You will miss defects. You will miss, whether they're asset defects, process defects, you will miss them. So that's why you need to cover things that you can't find. And you must manage the client's expectation, whether that's your manager, your CEO, or if you're working for a consultancy company, then obviously the organisation employing you must manage their expectations. There's always somebody who will criticise the outcomes because they won't understand the difference between a full audit and a desktop audit. Asset inspections. You can't inspect everything, as I said. I'm just banging on this one again. So you pick a random sample, and as I said at the very beginning, it's better if you pick the sample, not the manager or the client. Okay? It does need just a small audit team to do it. I reckon about 10% of examples should be looked at. 10% is reasonable. These are only visual inspections. You're not going to test anything. You're not going to open up any cupboards or make holes or dig holes in the ground to look at things. You're just going to look at them and take a photograph of them. But the equipment itself can give you clues that something's wrong. It could be very noisy, or it could be vibrating, which would go with noise as well. It could be running at a high temperature. Quite often I've walked into plant rooms and I can smell burning oil. So you try to track down where that's coming from, because your bearings are burning out and things like that. Once all the conditions of these things have been established, you apply the pattern across all the other assets in the profile. This is where you extrapolate and predict. So if you've only seen really good assets, they may not be a true picture of the whole organisation. You just don't know.